Okay, so we'll call this meeting to order at 6:33. First item on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, and with liberty and justice for all. So next up is correspondence, visitors, and public comments. I have a list of people in the Swanton Municipal Building. And then after they go, we can have anybody that's online raise their hand and they can provide their comment. And as usual, the comments are 3 minutes long. So first up is Tammy Underwood of Swanton.
First off, I want everyone to realize that everything that is going on with this pandemic is all based on fear-mongering, control, and the incessant greed of those that think they have the right to control humanity. People need to stand up for their own rights, refuse to conform to this evil narrative, and let those orchestrating these events know that their souls are not for sale. And that includes our own governor. Yes, he is also lying to us. I have been provided information that directly contradicts what you see on the mainstream news and what is being pushed by our own state government. The hospitals are not overrun with COVID patients, and the majority are not children or the unvaccinated. As a matter of fact, most of the people testing positive are vaccinated. That is because the virus is the so-called vaccine. There are babies born to vaccinated mothers in local hospitals that are sickly and cannot gain weight no matter what is tried to help them gain weight. Coincidence? I think not. I also know of people that have developed heart issues and brain bleeds, but yet our illustrious government keeps pushing these jabs. Hospitals are not overrun. There is a shortage of nurses, partly because of vaccine mandates that are not even legal. Fewer nurses mean fewer patients can be taken in, thus creating a false narrative that the hospitals are, quote, overrun. I was told on one particular day in the past couple of weeks that in one hospital here, there were 15 patients seen for COVID, of which 11 were fully vaccinated. That's 73%. On another day, 3 nurses were sent home early because there were no patients for them. The state and the mainstream news are lying to us. You are abiding by instructions that are not laws at the expense of our children's physical and mental health. Take a stand and make the right decisions. Take the masks off of our children and stop promoting the gene-altering bioweapon our government is portraying as a vaccine. If it were truly a vaccine, numbers would be going down instead of up. We wouldn't need to get jabbed every other month because it wanes, and the VAERS data, which is said to only display about 1% of actual numbers, would not be so astronomically high. And don't you find it odd that our so-called experts refuse to acknowledge natural immunity for those of us that have had COVID and recovered? That is a very real thing and has been since the beginning of time. You should all be as furious and terrified as I and others are that know the truth, that our own government is doing this to us. Wake up and stand up. And now, Robert, if you'd like to play that video I sent you, I'd like everybody to see it.
How long is the video?
It's a minute and I think 40-something seconds.
You have 30 seconds left, so.
Caleb's going to give me his time, so.
Okay, go ahead.
Reply. There's 1. Here's 2. Next, we're going to try a cloth mask. Remember, we want to stop this moisture that's coming out of our mouth because that's what COVID writes on. Here's 1. Here's 2. Next, we're going to try an N95 with a cloth mask. Here's 1. Here's a cloth mask on the N95. Here's 1. Here's a cloth mask on the N95. Now we're going to try 2 N95s. So we can see that double masking definitely does work, help knock down the moisture. Some double mask more than others. So use this information as your shield, as it were, against this invisible enemy. Coronavirus is transport. Don't get vaporized.
Stop doing this to our kids.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone online? Seeing no hands, that concludes our public comments. On to agenda review. I have no adjustments. Julie?
The only thing that I would say is that if we at some point get into specific contractual issues, any reductions in force or any anticipated changes like that, or too much around negotiations in discussing this budget, we may want to have a finding that we should go into executive session.
Okay.
Chris,
Don?
I think like probably Julie has covered it, but I was going to say, I don't know the other questions that people may have, but I may have a couple of questions that I would, and it depends how the discussion goes, what we get for information, but there are a couple of things that I've talked a little bit with Laura that if I do ask, I want to ask at executive session because it could be reflective of personnel and contractual agreements. So just wait and see what develops, but I agree with what Julie said.
Okay. So with that, we'll move on to consent agenda, which first on that is approval of meeting minutes from December 16th. So I'd entertain a motion to approve those minutes. Toby's the first. Steve's the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of approving December 16th meeting minutes, raise your hand. Noes and abstentions. We have motion carries 8-0-1. Terry's abstaining. Okay, under new business, first up is the Highgate HVAC project, which there will be action.
So Chris, I did share the proposal documents as well as a sample contract or a proposed contract from EEI. I believe Eric Lafayette from EEI is on as well.
I am on the phone.
Okay, so if there's any additional questions, but the task force, I believe, at our previous meeting was looking to make the recommendation to move forward in Highgate with the classroom ventilation portion of the project, as well as the addition of alternate 1, which is the multi-purpose ventilation portion. I did also share a projected financial overview, just a small spreadsheet outlining what the funding sources would be for that project or what the proposed funding sources would be. So not sure if anyone from the facility task force would like to elaborate.
Well, this is what we had started talking about at the last meeting. This is going to use the remaining funds from the bond for Highgate. Plus we need to we need some additional funding because the bond doesn't cover all the work needed. Basically, it's going to go through, update all the HVAC that isn't updated. It's going to have the air handlers on it for the entire brick building, I believe, except for the cafeteria and the kitchen. But the entire rest of the brick building will have updated HVAC with controls and filters, and it's going to be much more maintenance friendly than what our current system is. I don't remember the exact numbers, how much we needed, 700,000 or 800,000 more.
804,610, which we expect to have using general fund unexpended funds. We expect there to be a surplus that will be substantial. Obviously, it's not audited yet, but if we can purchase the materials, which are one of the most expensive portions, with that $800,000, then the bond funding can go for the work itself. Laura, am I explaining that correctly?
Yes. I think, we tossed around some different ideas at the facility task force meeting, the potential for additional HVAC ESSER fund, COVID related funding that may become available, or utilizing ESSER 3 funding for this. But I really do think right now, given, what we estimate to be our surplus at the end of this fiscal year and the timeline for the project, as well as the fact that we have many other facility or capital related projects that might qualify for ESSER funding, that it might be more responsible to utilize our projected surplus for this project, or at least that portion that's not covered by the bond proceeds.
I do see a hand up. It's from Kate. If you could state your name for the meeting minutes, please.
Yes, absolutely. My name is Kate Barcelos. I'm a reporter for the St. Albans Messenger.
Okay, and you have a question?
I do. Thank you. Actually, I'm actually kind of preliminary to this.
Chris, I'm going to leave and try to come back because I cannot hear you people when you're talking. It must be my computer.
Sorry about that. Go ahead, Kate.
Oh, no, sorry about that. So just beginning to understand the use of ESSER funds in the district and what they will be used for. And I guess I'm kind of tuning in to kind of understand where the district plans to use ESSER funds and when their priorities are. If this is an appropriate meeting to ask those questions out or not, kind of tuning in here.
ESSER funds, I'm gonna have our business manager attest to that. She does a much better job than I. But that's an ever evolving discussion. We talk about where we can use them all the time. There's guidelines for each level of ESSER funding. Like I said, though, I'm gonna let Laura McAllister speak to this.
And
Laura,
so
And I'm gonna punt to Julie first, and then I can fill in. But I think Julie can explain kind of the overall, the broad kind of spectrum.
Sure.
At this point, Kate, this meeting is one to go over an HVAC project and the remaining bond proceeds, but then to go over the FY23 budget. Of course, there are some ESSER 2 fund expenses in there and some anticipated ESSER 3, but we are developing and finalizing our ESSER 3 proposal, which would then be sent out to the public. And I think when that is ready to go, we have about 90 days to get that ready and submitted to the state. I think that is what you're really interested in, if I'm hearing correctly.
absolutely, any additional supports that are being invested in by school systems, additionally, this time around, and for fiscal year 2023, excuse me, that's definitely what I'm interested in as well. But thank you, Julie, so much for explaining that to me in better detail, so I understand.
Kate, and I'd be happy to speak with you if you want to arrange a phone call, because we like to talk budget with the messenger anyway. And so, of course, there's some ESSER 2 funding in the FY23 budget. Our expectation is really to be spending ARP ESSER, the bigger chunk of money, in FY24.
Fantastic. That is great to know, Ms. Reginald. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
I appreciate it.
Chris?
Go ahead, Don.
Yeah, I got my volume back up. Has Peter commented on the project?
No.
Okay, all right. I guess what I'd like to say is that after a lot of discussion and some really good answers from not only our staff, but EEI, I strongly believe that we should move forward with this project. I know it's going to take a lot of money and it's going to take some good luck and probably funds from multiple sources, but I really believe we need to get this job done. And if Yes is there, I'd like to kind of pull his ear a little bit, but this may be the last big project.
We lost you, Don. I can't hear you. Yeah, still can't hear you, Don.
Don, I think it's your volume.
Okay.
Yeah,
I can
we
hear
you now.
I can hear you people now. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, Don.
Okay. So did you hear any of what I said? No.
Yes, you did. You supported the proposal. but
Right.
then we lost
That's the
you after
bottom
that.
line. Even though it's going to be a challenge to put it all together, Yes, it's going to have to do a good job of coordinating. But I just feel it's a priority. It needs to be addressed at this time.
Eric from EEI, who is the engineering firm and performance contracting company that is responsible for drafting this proposal, and the contract is on as well. If anyone has any additional questions, that's really why he's here. But as Don said, there's been multiple facility task force meetings where we've really dug down into the specifics of this project for Highgate.
Terry.
Thank you. I just have one thing. I'm sure you already went into this. Like Laura said, you've been meeting for a long time and going over all this. But you decided this makes more sense than building a new school.
Building a new school was never an option in Highgate. One of the variations that we did look at was adding on to the school. Another variation we looked at is to putting money into the white building. When we did the bond originally, when it was still the Highgate School Board, we had a much more broad scope of what we were trying to do. We were trying to fix a little stuff everywhere. We've fixed the parking lot already. We've done some work on some roofs, but the remaining part of the budget, we were trying to find the best way to expend the rest of the bond proceeds. And of what we looked at, upgrading the HVAC system seemed to give us our best bang for our buck, given the times we're in right now, especially. And then a lot of the other issues that this building does have, because it has hot and cold zones, depending what time of year it is. It can be really hot in the summer. It can be pretty cold in the winter. The systems are very antiquated. We've been trying to update those, but there's still a lot of systems that are very unmaintenance friendly. So this was a way to fix a lot of problems within the brick building and solve a lot of issues. It doesn't fix our space issues, but it fixes a lot of other issues.
I think this is the first step in a phase of potential projects, Terry, to that regard. And we were looking at multiple projects, but this one would not interfere with adding additional space. You can add it onto this this project at any time if they did add space to Highgate. So it was really kind of the project that made sense at this time and with the amount of funds available.
Thank you. I just know from old houses, sometimes you spend more trying to fix them up than if you just bought a new house. So
that's the white building.
I was just going to say that's where we're at with the white building. The brick building is a little different story. I mean, the original part of the brick building was built in '64, I believe. And then the newer part was built in '89. So the building's not that old. It's just a lot of the systems need to be updated.
Thank you.
But the white building is that old house that we're not trying to put a lot of money into. So we need a motion for each one of the proposal, the contracts and the financials, or do you just need one overview? Or
I think one motion with including the classroom ventilation and adding the alternate of the multi-purpose ventilation room, which would be utilizing the remainder of the bond proceeds and then a potential surplus from the current year general fund. Like I would like the bond proceed language to be in that motion, and then a motion for you to sign the contract.
Peter, I saw your hand up.
So I just wanted to comment on Terry talking about we had different proposals, different projects, and that's true. And the committee came up with this project as it was an overall building improvement that was going to greatly improve the comfort level in that building and the air quality in the building. I know Joshua's been in almost all our meetings as well, and he's supported this project as well. Chris, I don't know how the wording needs to be, but I'll certainly make the motion for you to sign that onto this project.
Okay,
However
so
it
the
be worded.
motion would be to, not sure, how do you want that worded, Laura, to make sure we cover everything?
Okay, a motion to approve moving forward with the EEI contract to upgrade the classroom ventilation and the multi-purpose room ventilation at the Highgate School District, utilizing the remainder of the bond proceeds
For the Highgate School.
for the Highgate School,
Okay.
as
so
well
there's
as some general fund dollars.
Right.
Okay, so there's our motion. Peter's the first. Don's the
Just one
second.
question on that motion. There's like in this scope of work, there's dollar figures on there. Do we
Oh.
want to use those?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. I was assuming that was going to be included. Yeah.
Okay, all right, I just wanted to make clarification.
Thank you, Peter, because that's why my hand shot up. I will second it, but that's not why my hand went up, Chris. I want to make sure it is in there. The other question is, ask Julie on this. Should the contract be separated from the funding? Should it be two different motions, or are you comfortable the way it is?
I don't really believe the funding needs to be outlined other than for the bond proceed purpose. I like to be very clear with that. But other than that, I don't.
That's why when you said it, I wanted two motions, but anyway, whatever, we need to get there, so. fine.
Yeah, I just think that the important pieces to have in the motion are approving the EEI proposal and the two stages that you're approving. And that we would be using the residual bond project funds and additional general fund dollars.
Okay, yeah, that has to be clear for us. Okay, thank you. I will second that, Chris.
Okay, any further discussion? Terry.
Just one question. You're not going to put the specific dollar amounts, are you? Because like Julie just said, it could be more general because they do say their prices go up in 2022. And I didn't know if they quoted based on the 2022 prices or.
These prices will not go up. We had spoken to Eric from EEI, and Eric, please correct me if I'm misunderstanding, but these prices were good until this meeting, as long as we could sign the contract this week. And because of the language in the contract, there should not be a need for a contingency.
That is correct. Yep, this pricing is good if we get it signed right away.
Great.
So in the motion, we didn't have anything about the board chair signing a contract, so maybe we should just do a second motion for the signing of the contract. And then we can have this first one for the proposal, acceptance of the proposals. Everybody okay with that? Okay, so all those in favor of accepting EEI's proposal with the two stages, using the remaining bond proceeds and the dollar amounts to be filled in, because I don't know them offhand, but all those in favor, raise your hand. Motion carries 9-0. Second motion on the table is to have the board chair signed the EEI contract. Don's the first, Steve's the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of accepting or having the board chair sign the EEI contract, raise your hand. Motion carries 9-0. Okay, under new business, we still have FY23 announced tuition.
Okay, so we haven't brought this to you in a couple of years, actually, since we've merged, because we had set a tuition rate that was fairly high, but let me open up this document. So every year by January 15th, the school district is required to either set a tuition rate or their tuition for tuitioning students would be set at the rate that they've had previously. And previously in due to the MVSD budget and the uncertainties, we had set our rate fairly high. And so we have not had a need to adjust that. And then there's a reconciliation done if we're charging too much, more than we should, more than what it costs us to educate kids. Then there's a reconciliation done with any schools that are paying tuition. We now have, developed a budget that is fairly or more accurate, I would say, with MVSD. And so we do think it would be correct of us to set a tuition rate, announced tuition rate. We are proposing elementary rate of $15,000 and a secondary, which is middle school and high school, rate of $15,750. That would be down from $16,500, which was our previous rate, but again, more consistent with what our actual tuition cost would be. The calculation for this is basically your gen ed costs. It does not include things like debt or capital construction or special ed. So there's a formula that we follow. We anticipate all of our expenses. We back out things like the capital project lines, capital improvement lines, and debt and special ed. And then we come up with this calculation per pupil. And again, there's a reconciliation that would happen if it was any more than 3% difference from this number. Then there would be a reconciliation with the schools that were paying tuition or families that were paying tuition potentially in the following year. So the board, I'm asking if they would consider approving this rate as proposed for fiscal year 23.
Okay, so at this time, I would entertain a motion to set the elementary tuition at 15,000 and our secondary tuition at 15,750. Terry's a first. Devin's a second. Any discussion? Devin.
I'm just curious, Julie or Laura or anyone who might be able to answer this. Are these rates a factor for a lot of families in choosing which school they elect for their students, their kids to go to, or is that primarily driven by which town their friends select, or where, just general proximity?
Yeah, because school districts are the ones that pay that bill. Parents that live in choice towns like Georgia or Alberg or Shelton are driven by those other factors, where their family went to school, where they work and, access. So yeah, that's a factor for other school boards of sending towns, but not so much for individual families.
Any other questions or discussion?
I have a question. So what explains the drop from last year?
Well, it's not really a drop. As I said, due to the uncertainty when we merged, we set the rate quite high because you cannot, one thing I left out was you can't charge more, you can charge less. But if we set it at 16.5 and our actual rate turned out to be 17,000, I could not go to the school districts or the schools and ask for that money. I can only charge up to what we set it at. And so we set that number very high as in caution, or to be, not too conservative. So it really was not too high. It just has to do with the merger.
It's like hotel rooms. When you see it could charge you up to $600 bucks a night if the Olympics are in the community you're at. Okay. So I'm curious if last year was high, because I seem to remember these numbers years ago too, right? Or they were the same. What do you like 2 years ago? Were we 15?
Yeah, they haven't really changed all that much. Because again, you're backing out special ed costs. Some of your biggest variables are being backed out, your capital improvement lines. So that definitely comes into play. And when we merged, obviously things changed as well, but there almost always is a need for a reconciliation. We just, now that we're honing in kind of on the MVSD scenario, and I have not had an elementary tuition paid since I've been the business manager for 10 years. So it's primarily the high school rate. we're more confident that this would fall within that 3%. To avoid.
Okay, let's ask Laura, so basically what you've done is you've had an opportunity to see what our actual costs are at MVU, middle and high school, and you don't want to go over that 3%, which requires now even more paperwork than we usually have. So do
Doesn't
you have
require
a
the reconciliation on both ends, right? Yep.
Because I don't
We-
mind charging 2.5% more than it costs us, because that's money for us as I'd call it a carrying charge. If you go over 3, then you do have paperwork and you have to adjust. So as long as you feel that comfortable, I'm going to support it. But when I was doing this many years ago, I always tried to figure out, if I can get 2% for somebody's money for nothing, I'm going to go for it. But we'll see.
That is the sweet spot. Yes.
Yeah. No, the 16.5 from the last previous years was somewhat inflated. Honestly, we were doing this at the same time frame before we had ever actually gone through a budget year of MVSD. So when we ran the calculation, Becky and I both agreed that, you know what, we're going to add on $1,000 per equalized pupil because we cannot charge more. And if in case there was something that we weren't thinking of as a new entity, completely brand new, we would still be covered with the tuition. And that is allowable. You don't want to keep doing that, obviously.
Okay, any further discussion? Peter?
Laura, is this rate that we have on here what we're actually going to charge, or is this a maximum?
It is what we would charge, but if it was any more than 3% of what our actuals ended up being, then we would be responsible to do a reconciliation with the school, with the sending school.
Oh,
or
okay.
the family. But that would happen like the year following, after all the expenses are complete, they've been audited and the attendance all of that has been done, then there would be a reconciliation that would be done. But yes, this is what, if someone wanted to send a student or a school wants to send a student right now, this is what we would charge.
Okay.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of setting the elementary tuition at 15,000 and the secondary tuition at 15,750, raise your hand. Motion carries 9-0. Okay, on to old business. First up under old business is check warrants.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I have the check warrants in front of me. This one's dated January 4th for the month ending December 2021. Accounts payable at $744,013.52. Payroll checks at $49,927.01. Payroll other disbursements, $1,521,534.05. Payroll deductions, $582,300.40.
So I'll tell you what to write, okay?
Total is $2 million.
Oh boy, Steve just froze.
I was just going to ask if that was my computer or if it was Steve's.
$2,897,774.98.
Oh,
I
Steve,
I think he's back.
Sorry, did I drop off? Sorry.
you didn't drop off, but you froze for a second.
Oh, sorry.
Julie finished the one part we didn't hear. Okay, at this time, I'd entertain a motion to accept check warrants as read. Terry's the first. Steve's the second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of accepting check warrants as read, raise your hand. Opposed? Abstentions? I didn't see Peter's vote. Were you for or against or abstaining? Yeah, Peter's froze too.
Yeah. With a very intense look on his face.
Are you back, Peter? No. Well, at this time, we'll call it 8-0, and I'll ask him when his technical issues are over. So next up is our FY23 budget discussion.
So we've gone around about the best way to present this information. Laura is going to share her screen. We also shared with you a confidential sort of summary, and it's confidential because it has some contractual information and negotiations information in it. But it also has some of the very specifics of, some of the known retirements, et cetera, but not all of those are in writing. So I think that the best way for us to start, honestly, is to go through this. We've removed FY21 so that or hidden it so that you can see a little bit better. Laura, I still think it needs to be a little more full screen. I think if you change your view options to
I don't know how much more I can change it, but
if you make sure that your view options as a participant change to standard, and that's all the way in the right hand corner where there's that little view and there's a little sort of.
yeah, I can't do that when I'm sharing though, Julie.
Right. No, I mean the individuals in their meeting.
Oh, okay.
If you do that, you can make Laura's presentation be your whole screen. And so it's the little icon in the right-hand corner of your screen that says view. You click on it and move it to standard. And then all of the participants become a little sort of sidebar. And you can see more. I see from Terry's waving that it's working for her.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I just figured I'd give you that. And if you have two screens, you can move it out of the way or shrink it down, which won't help Chris, because then Chris can't, people should probably unmute themselves, board members, if they have questions, because Chris may not be able to see you.
Yeah, if you raise your hand, I see that too.
Oh, okay, good.
You do the digital raise your hand, but otherwise you have to unmute, because right now I can only see who's presenting.
So what we thought we would do is go through, you have it in the drive, and you can always pick up a hard paper copy, but honestly, the paper copies are harder to see. And actually, I think what Laura's presenting is much clearer than the paper copy. And so we can go through sort of each of the big funds. The general ed fund is the largest one, school-based fund, and then special ed is a separate fund, and the grants are separate funds. That's been a change over the past few years for people to get used to. And then we will go through the general ed instruction and salary and answer questions about, how many paras there are. Well, some of them are accounted for in this area, some of them are in another, but we'll just talk through that level if that works for folks. Does that sound good? Of course, I can't see anybody's response.
I saw some thumbs up, Julie. So
okay,
I think
so
we're all
Laura,
set.
do you want to start? We jump right in the first section, instructional programs. That's right where the salaries and benefits for most of our teachers is.
Sure. One thing I would just like to, a couple things actually, just before we start. And I think the intention here, as Julie said, is to kind of dive deeper and really gain some additional understanding of what we're approving. But this is the fund that Julie's talking about. Hopefully you can see what I'm highlighting on my screen, but this is the school-based fund. Part of the new chart of accounts is that we moved away from having one fund technically, which is what the voters would approve, which we called our general fund. Now we have these different funds. So we have the school-based, which is primarily all the general education instruction costs. And then we move into the different funds that are later on, but I'm just highlighting that section so you'll know where that would be identified. But there's a early childhood program fund and special ed, and then the different grants are broken down into grant funding, etc. There's a central office fund, for instance. So just keep an eye out for that. I guess the other thing that I'd like to highlight is, as Julie said, we did kind of hide just for purposes of being able to view this information virtually, but we have a fiscal year 22 budget column here, and then there's an anticipated, and then there's proposed for the fiscal year 23. The variance column is actually the budget versus the proposed budget, but I would encourage you to also take a look at the anticipated column, because as you know, we're budgeting very early. The year happens, and then we start developing a budget before that year is over. And so, you know, the variance technically is budget to budget, but really that anticipated column can sometimes give you a lot more information as to what it's actually costing in which categories for the current year. Obviously, these are not set in stone because the year isn't over, but I just would like to draw your attention to that. And so what we did in the last version that you got, which was kind of the homework assignment I kind of gave to the board, which I know I've gotten questions, so I know people did it, is we defined some of the function and objects for you. So here you can see instructional programs, costs associated with direct instruction to gen ed students, it's classroom teachers, paras, etc. Wages, benefits, support services, supplies, equipment are all charged here. And then we tried here on the right-hand side in the notes section to really identify what's included in each of these object codes. So these smaller numbers here are object codes, and we wanted to kind of identify exactly what was inside those. So we're breaking down the FTEs or full-time equivalencies for staffing, for instance, for salaries for elementary teachers. And then in the next portion of the note, you'll see we broke it down by location. And then anything in blue is ESSER funding positions that are included in this general fund that also include offsetting revenue on the revenue side. This by no means is everything that we are funding with ESSER right now. There are many other, you know, MOUs or supplementals or smaller positions that are currently being funded with ESSER, tutoring, long-term subs, additional hours for custodial support, VTVLC coordination, extra curriculum work and development, all things like that. But those are things that are directly related to COVID that we expect that by the time the ESSER funding is gone, those will not be needed anymore. Or if they do, then we'd have to shift some funding sources. These positions that are included currently are things that have been discussed with principals and the admin team, and we believe, you know, may continue after the ESSER funding is gone. They are important definitely right now. There's some to be decideds in there. But what we're trying to avoid is kind of that fiscal cliff at the end. Our intention, of course, is to repurpose any funding that we can, reallocate funds, look at reconfiguring things to absorb any of these costs. But we still think it's more responsible to include them in this draft and at least get them covered in the budget because they are important right now while we're showing the offsetting revenue. But I just wanted to be really, really kind of clear about that.
So Julie and Laura, where are the positions? What are the positions and where are they going? Where are they? What school?
Well, I'll draw your attention to the notes column of this. So if you look at the very first line, that's elementary teachers. That's general education elementary teachers. There are 73.35 full-time equivalents in the district that are elementary. 10.45 of them are in Franklin, 22.7 in Highgate, and 40.2 in Swanton. We have two positions in the elementary level that are ESSER funded. They may have already been in the budget like an interventionist, but we're offsetting with some, you know, they're appropriate for ESSER revenue. So we've done that. At MVU, their total position.
That's where my question was.
Yeah.
What school are these elementary schools are these positions in and what are the positions?
And I have that broken down on the notes page that I included in the drive that we can go over after, Dawn. I did identify where they are on this sheet specifically, but I have the exact location and the.
I'm just looking at the red and blue notes on my paper copy.
Yeah, it's a separate document that actually outlines, you know, that, for instance, there's an additional kindergarten teacher at Highgate Elementary School. That's in the note section that I added, in the note page, excuse me.
Okay.
So an example where that's a temporary position for a couple of years. That is, but it is a full-time teaching position and the board may or may not need it depending on enrollment in the future. So that is in this budget and it's covered by ESSER. Another example would be at MVU. You put a PLP teacher in the budget that in FY22's budget, and that position is filled. That is a position that is eligible for ESSER reimbursement. So that position is covered by ESSER, but it's not an additional position.
Okay. All right.
So we have examples where the position is additional. And if we keep it when the revenue just is gone, we would make offsetting cuts or make a conscious decision to add it to the budget. Or there are positions that are already existing positions that we're using ESSER revenue for right now.
And this question may be executive session, but have you been notified by any teachers that they're retiring? And if they are, is that figured into this? Because usually people that retire
Yeah,
are a little higher paid than people we might hire to replace them.
absolutely. Those adjustments, and that is in the notes, and some of that is in executive session because there are some unknowns there as well.
Okay.
But we do have some that we do know, and we have been formally notified, and we've made those adjustments where it makes sense. There are restructuring things that we may want to discuss in executive session that may include eliminating some positions and repurposing others.
Thank you, Julie.
You're very welcome.
And I would just add to that we have only adjusted for the retirements that we have actually received letters for at this time. We are projecting or estimating, or we believe that there will be several more, but only the ones that we have formally received notification of are included in this draft.
Right.
And then just to clarify, in regards to FTEs compared to the current year, because that was a question that I've received from a board member recently. There have really been no changes to professional staff position FTEs or support staff position FTEs. So paras, behavior interventionists, and classroom teachers, intervention coaches have all remained consistent other than those ESSER positions for the most part. When we sat down and met with principals, really, typically we would discuss things like adding, I'm trying to think of something now. I don't know, increasing art position or adding another art teacher or adding a foreign language or adding another interventionist. But the only additions that are the changes out from FTE to FTE from year to year have been ESSER funded in relation to COVID response or ESSER funding.
I would just say that the one exception to that in this draft is there is a 0.2 addition for a Highgate art teacher because we do have a retirement there.
Oh, right.
We do expect that position will do some project-based hands-on learning with teachers with that additional time. And that is because, as you pointed out, Don, you're more likely to hire a less experienced teacher, and it is hard to fill part-time positions.
Definitely.
So I'm not sure how specific we want to get in all of these notes that we have. I guess I would just stop and ask if anyone has questions specifically in regards to any of this that falls under instructional programs. And then I would really move on if there's no questions.
Right.
Chris, I have a question about NCSS CAT 324. It looks like it's gone from 140 over the last 2 years down to 35,000. Has that money been moved to something else, somewhere else?
Yeah, I think
No, it's a BI. It actually moved. If you look in the note, it was a contract in Highgate and Swanton. They're looking to hire a BI in place of that NCSS contract.
Okay. Is that Highgate?
So it would be an employee. It would be moving to an employee rather than a service contract. Part of the problem with NCSS contracts right now is the availability of the staff to fulfill those contracts. He's on line 324 under 1101. Julie, I see you're maybe looking.
yes, but that's a general ed contract. That's not our only CAT worker contract. We have many
no.
others.
Yes, under special ed.
This would still be a contract.
No.
This one would, but the reason
So it's
we
not
had
a,
in- We had
Services
increased it in a previous draft. That's why the note is there. Does that answer your question, Don?
Yeah, so it looks like Swanton and Highgate will gain a person. Each will gain a person, or
Not really. That note is from the previous draft when there was some other discussions. This is a general ed contract.
Okay.
Swanton's is not contracting. And then if we look under special ed, when we get down there, I can highlight where the special ed
Okay, so it's not
contracts and
special
such are.
Laura, one other question that I had asked you about, and I don't know if the full board cares or not, but I know substitute teachers, if you look at substitute teachers, we budget 160 and we spent 96, and we on 160, we spent 66. That's not really my issue if you think we're going to spend 160. I mean, we shouldn't pad it that much if we aren't, but I'd like to sometime have a discussion. I don't know if the MVU administration's here tonight.
No, they're not.
Okay, does
And
any other?
subs, for one, have been very difficult to find. For instance, at MVU, we contract with Kelly Services and, or even if they're employees, they're difficult to find. But also what you're looking at are years when COVID has happened and subs, school years have not been typical school years. And that's why those costs are down. The 160 is more reflective of prior to the pandemic costs. So we don't want to reduce that in hopes that someday the pandemic will be actually over.
So I guess my other question is, I know, Laura, I think you mentioned it and Bonnie may have once. At MVU, we hire people and they are there every day because we need them and more every day, right?
Yes.
We do have a couple. Those are completely funded with ESSER, our sort of full-time floating substitutes. Because we do use Kelly Services, but we don't actually, we don't often get people.
Okay, so why I mentioned it tonight, even though I don't know the role so much, I think that's a great concept that we should talk about in greater detail, because I don't know about Chris Dodge, how many he needs, but I would think it might be worthwhile before we get too far into another year about hiring one, say, Swanton, somebody that just shows up there to substitute every day. And I say that because some of the schools I've worked with in recent years, I think one of the schools in the islands, and maybe they don't still have it, but you could ask David Clark, but it's a person's is hired. She's an employee, and there's usually at least one person out every day. So
absolutely, Don, we've been doing that this past year. Oftentimes, and you'll see under the substitute line, the next one that's long-term, that there's a 0 there because we're using ESSER funding for that right now. But we are doing that. We're hiring some people. They're here every day and we have a place for them.
And that's in all the elementaries too? Because I knew MVU's been doing it, but it's
MVU's been doing it and Swanton's been doing it. I don't believe that Highgate or Franklin have been able to keep anybody or had any luck doing that.
All right. Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that, because I think that's an option. It makes a lot of sense educationally. And I don't think it's going to cost anymore. So thank you.
I have a quick question. Just Don pointing out how we've underspent that substitutes line for so long. We've now added that's line 197 for those additional stipends. I guess I'm curious, if we were to get enough substitutes to spend the 160, would that allow us to avoid spending the 77,500? Or I guess this question is, are we double counting?
We're not double counting those. We are trying very hard to put all of our additional work, so all of our MOUs, people that work on curriculum, people that any additional work that teachers do that they receive an MOU for, we're trying very hard to put that in one spot, and that's now falling here. It used to sort of be, I don't like to use the word hidden, but it used to be part of the salary lines and in multiple places, and we've really tried to identify it here. I need to get a handle on, and I think our whole admin team, on exactly what all these additional costs are. People get MOUs for all sorts of different things. We have a whole binder full of them. And so, no, this is The one I can think of right now is curriculum work. Julie, I'm not sure if you can think of any others.
Anytime a teacher is
Additional
doing
days
work,
over the summer for intervention, I think.
anytime teachers are doing work above and beyond the contracted hours of the contract that we're directing them to do, or we've created a project. We need a team of people to work on this project. They're receiving a memo of understanding on that so that it's outside of their contract. And it's usually a flat rate kind of stipend.
Okay, so this is different than that side letter we did with people covering.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. That was my confusion. Thanks.
And I can tell you that right now, when I tell right now as a management strategy for ESSER funding, a lot of those MOUs are flowing through ESSER. So if it is for curriculum work, or we're paying somebody to attend a professional development or something like that, that might be out of the ordinary or outside of their normal scope of work, I'm flowing those through ESSER. And then that's when, if a principal comes to me and says, hey, I really want to do this book initiative or something smaller that really would take a lot of time to run through a federal grant like ESSER, then I'm saying, nope, we'll just take that at a general fund, but we're going to flow things like this that are very clearly, COVID related and extra support for students through ESSER.
So Laura, this is Steve.
Yep.
So that's more of a tracking device for you to keep track of what's going where.
More of a, keep the big expenses in one place, things I can track. All tutoring costs are going through ESSER. All the MOUs primarily are going through ESSER for curriculum work and focus. Really, a lot of that work right now is in response to the pandemic. I can tie all of it to COVID right now. That's what their primary focus is on. And so, yeah, it makes the bucket smaller, because every time we try to do these smaller things, we have to deal with regulations and compliance and procurement and paperwork and documentation and amendments. And so I'm trying to keep our grant buckets big. Yeah.
No, I get that, and I kind of like it, but on the flip side, the 160 that we're talking about on 131, if we see that going down, we can kind of relate it to 197.
Not directly. You can correlate that to the fact that I'm offsetting a lot of those costs in both of those areas with ESSER right now.
Okay.
But I can't reduce them because ESSER is going to go away. So if I reduce them, then I have to try to get them back in fiscal year 24.
Yeah, I would take the 131 line is low because we have less substitutes. The 132 line is being funded with ESSER.
Well, the same thing for 131 right now, because the long-term subs or anybody that's more than just a typical daily sub, and even some of those are being charged to ESSER right now. So it's kind of a combination of both in that line, but yeah.
I just wanted to clear,
Yeah.
It's easy to get in the weeds. So I'm trying to clarify, and then, that makes
this is exactly why it's so hard right now, after just have gone through a merger and trying to establish that baseline of expenses. And then you have all this federal funding coming in and your years are not typical. So some of it is sort of playing a game where how do we strategically set ourselves up for success at the end of it, and not, some kind of a cliff or a huge addition of expense needed because we were funding it with ESSER and now we aren't, or expenses changed. But
okay. You want to move on to some of the other functions?
Yes. Okay.
I think that's a big one, because that's where most of our teachers are.
But really, most of the increase in here, as you guys can see, is it's salaries and benefits, and that's typical over the whole scope of the budget. So if we look at 100s and 200s over here as far as numbers, that's your salaries and benefits, and that's where you'll see the most of the increases as we move along. As we move down, the next function is English as a second language, or ELL services. That's for services for students for whom English is not a primary language, and that's adaptive support needs for students. You can see that part of this is funded also with grant funding. So we'll see that later on in the budget, or in a different fund under the grant fund. But 0.75 of our ESL teacher, which we have one of, is funded here. Obviously associated benefits, small amount of supplies, etc. Moving down, unless anybody has a question, please just stop me if you do. Some I'm just going to kind of glaze over unless someone interrupts me. Interscholastic, so costs associated with operations and activities of athletic departments and teams, including athletic directors, trainers, coaches, and referees. This was another thing that we've shifted recently in the last couple of years, really trying to get all of those costs for referees and coaches in one place. I'll also, corresponding with the new chart of accounts. But again, you can see FTEs here. Obviously, athletic director is a full-time position at MVU, but just very part-time at the elementary schools. The athletic trainer position, so 171, that is a shift from a contract with Northwestern Medical Center. So that's why you're seeing this as an increase under salaries. But you'll see down below under 341 purchase professional services that's gone down the corresponding 30,000 because and Northwestern Medical Center was actually unable to fulfill that contract this year. And so
That's a really good move. I hope that continues.
Yes, we hope so too, because I think the person's highly qualified and can actually do more for our students who have training needs as well. So I think that's pretty exciting. I think we're feeling pretty lucky about that hire.
I have a couple questions. Is now a good time or?
Yeah.
I did, one of the questions jumps ahead, but not really. So on that trainer, are they like on a teacher contract where they're done in the summer or?
Not on a teacher contract, but they are not contracted in the summer right now. But it's not a teacher contract. We're very cautious of that term. Yeah.
Well, I didn't mean it like that, but so they're not working in the summer. They're not under contract in the summer.
The contract we currently have does not cover the summer. That doesn't mean we may not contract with them for the summer. I don't know what the need would be, but.
Okay. And so the other question is, I don't want people at Franklin to hate me, but I'm curious about the 812 line. And then when you look at the 151 line, or are those not comparable?
I'm not sure if Joyce wants to speak to you mean the support that they're getting or
where
they're contracting?
I see the line is 8,000 to Franklin Rec. I guess I'm seeing some disparity between the three buildings. I don't understand why Franklin has, I can understand because in 151, the only athletic directors are at Swanton and Highgate. But it's about half the line of what's going to Franklin. So
because those are part-time positions. And what happens in Franklin is that we pay a fee for the students who participate. It's a flat fee. It includes their uniform. I was
going to say the uniform is part of it because we're not providing the supplies or the uniform. Yeah. So some of those expenses in the lines below that we are covering for other schools, we are not covering for Franklin directly because the rec is covering those expenses like a uniform or basketballs or.
So we're doing it as like a purchase service.
If I could speak to this real quick. I don't know if this helped Toby or not, but before you got on the board, this was an equity thing that came up because Franklin was the only one not having uniforms provided for their athletes. And that's a lot of where this funding goes.
And I made
we were paying for Swanton and Highgate's uniforms for soccer and basketball, but we were not for Franklin. So this is a lot of where that funding in that rec line goes is for their uniforms. I mean, it provides other things, but.
Yeah, I just, one of the longer conversations I think is maybe some sort of assistant AD. I kind of flirted that out before, but I just think it would be cleaner and better chance of equity. I think if we're kind of the separate contract, it could be for anybody. It could be Swan or Highgate. I'm not trying to pick on Franklin, but I just see it there. So I guess that's a question for me. Maybe it all evens out. I don't know. It just seems a little different because I know, for example, and I don't know how it's funded, but I think the ski program is much more robust at Franklin compared to Swanton for sure. I don't know if that's still true, but it used to be the case. And I don't know, You know, does anyone know if that's still the case, or?
Are you talking how the ski program is funded,
Well,
Toby?
no, like the opportunities, like Franklin, don't the kids go in the winter almost, what, 3, 4, 5, 6 times a winter?
Well, we try to go 6 times, but half the time that doesn't work out. But
Yeah.
for one reason or another, no snow, too much snow, whatever. But actually, there's a $500 foundation fee. And we've recently, last couple of years, had a donation from the Bradfords to pay for that. But that is paid for by families. But we always make sure we have scholarships. Dawn was concerned about that a couple of years ago, and we always make sure that we check to make sure that finances are not a reason that kids don't participate. That's open to kids in grades 3 through 6. It has worked out really well with Franklin Rec, with the sports. And I was a little surprised when it said contract, because I mean, basically, when this came up, they had never asked us for any money. It came up a couple of years ago. I think it might have been when we had done the board meeting at Franklin, and somebody had come to the meeting, and it just came up about Franklin Rec. I think they were doing a presentation about the rec department, and Dawn brought up that we weren't supporting the sports, you know, the way it was being done in other schools, and made that motion. And basically, you know, we've just kind of asked them what, you know, and I think it was like $25 for a kid or something like that. Laura can correct me, but it was really very minimal what we've been paying for what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it might be $15. It's not very much.
Yeah, it's not very much at all. And it's really worked out really well, having that consistency from pre-K to grade 6. And so it's been a really good thing for Franklin. And as far as I think they've had a huge, and Devin might know some of this too, but I think in soccer, they had record numbers out in soccer. But the ski program, we do have a lot of kids in the ski program, which is great. Now we just need some snow.
Yeah, I'm just looking from the lens of equity between all the buildings. And I just know years ago, Swanton was way behind in ski. I think Highgate might have been too. If maybe we don't want to give all the kids the same opportunity to ski in each building. I don't know that, but all I'm saying is I think there's a inequity between that, whether it's wanted or not, I don't know. But I view that as an inequity that I guess I just don't know if it's intentional or unintentional, or no one really cares. Maybe I'm making something more than it is.
I don't know, because I don't know anything about the ski programs offered at the other schools. I know Highgate goes skiing. I thought Swanton had a ski program. I'm not sure what the ins and outs of the other ski programs are. I don't know. We've had really incredible parent support for our ski program. I mean, what makes it work is we have Ashley Batchelder and Laura Sullivan as the coordinators. They do that on their own time, basically, and volunteer to do that. And then we just have an amazing number of parents who chaperone. And that's what makes it work.
I think our new principal in Swanton, who came from the Fletcher area and lives in Johnson, may be promoting skier more than some of his predecessors.
I would like to just chime in. Thank you, Chris. I would like to add, I agree with Toby in terms of, I think there is something here that, not for budget time, but I think when we do budget, it brings about a lot of discussions for future, because I think there is something about our, each of the towns has a recreation department, and each, depending on how they work with the schools and everything, wouldn't it be nice if all the towns worked with the rec department and came up with something, that really works for all the kids? So I think we're onto something here. And I think maybe Toby's right about athletics not just being about the competition of schools, but about how we want our kids outside and how we want them doing things and how we want them skiing or cross-country skiing or kayaking that they've started, like in Swanton, that I don't think they got in Franklin or Highgate, So I think we do need to have some of these discussions, because I think kids do need that physical activity. And I think the schools, since we're a district, I think we need to look into this. I agree with you, Toby. I think it's a big deal.
I think when you're talking about that particular line item, that's that's other dues and fees. That's not just Franklin. Franklin was like $1,000.
Oh, I'm not
but
talking, yeah.
No,
I'm not
but when we're
about the
talking
budget.
about your vision conversation,
Yes.
I
that's
think
for
that
later.
that's an important conversation to have. And I think that it's certainly interscholastics is a place where that happens, and also after school programming, because we also do a lot of work with rec departments and getting kids outside with after school. So that's another place where we have a lot of support there. So I've written it down.
Good too.
Thank you.
Julie brings up a good point. These notes by all means are not all encompassing. These are what we can fit in a very small area, and usually like something that you might not think was included or might kind of cover the majority of the expenses. So always willing to look further into those lines. Don't think that that's encompassing all of the expense.
It might be helpful on that one, Laura, to maybe put in like what that expense was, so it doesn't look like it's so much. Because I did wonder when I saw it too.
Like, what am I getting for 7,000?
No,
Yeah,
even
that's
that-
every note section for each one of these lines could be its own book. So
I know. I'm sorry.
No, I know. And this is a start. I think these are good notes, and it's a start, but it's obviously developing also. Okay, next is co-curriculars, costs associated with operations of non-athletic co-curricular activities. So this is band, choir, student government, honor society, and other clubs. These are stipends or MOUs that people receive. Sorry, I thought I heard someone talking.
197, 1501, 197.
Yes. Any questions about that?
That's co-curricular advisors.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. That really hasn't changed.
Nope.
Right, but I just wonder why we're carrying, have some things been eliminated because of the virus? Because we're carrying 87,000 and we haven't come close to it in the last 3 years.
And in that case, it could be that there's some MOUs that are not encumbered yet for advisors that maybe not, again, the MOUs have not been issued yet. And so the anticipated number might be artificially low right now because some of those MOUs haven't been done. So there's not an encumbrance for those yet.
Okay.
For example, last year we didn't have a musical.
Okay.
So there was no MOU for that, for example.
All right. And social services, where was that somewhere else?
We didn't have yeah, I'm sorry, Laura. We didn't have a social worker before. We added a social worker position in response to COVID. We think it's a very important position. It's currently 100% ESSER funded, but we're showing it here.
Okay.
And that was one of those, it was actually a new code, Don, in part of the chart of accounts. They want things like that broken out.
Yeah. Someday we'll be paying for it, right? ESSER will be gone.
I would assume it's one of those positions that's important. So either that we'll make other adjustments to cover that position, you know, we'll get rid of a contract somewhere or something like that. That's why positions like that we think are very important. That could possibly be permanent. We're showing here pretty clearly. And this is one of those things that, you know, the mental health and emotional challenges of this pandemic, this position's at the high school and she's meeting with kids and counseling kids. She's doing great work.
Is it part-time?
It's a full-time position.
That's a pretty good deal.
It is.
For us.
Okay, so moving down to guidance services, this is our typical guidance counselors, but it also is, you know, evaluating students with abilities, assisting students in educational career plans and personal and social development. It does include things like school-based clinicians and, connect the school-based clinician and one school-based clinician in Highgate and Swanton. It also includes some stipends for work above and beyond typical contracts. Currently, it also includes under 162, the clerical, because MVU has a guidance counselor.
A guidance department secretary.
Admin support or whatever we want to call it.
Who also is a Medicaid clerk.
So,
Yes,
and
it has- I did-
you've seen, I'm sorry, Laura. I apologize. You've seen variation in that salary because you've had at least 3 different people in that position over the past 2 years.
As you can tell, Julie and I had a very thorough review of this budget, and we're trying to say the same things over each other.
I was going to say that must be a really hard job trying, thank God they have help, those counselors.
Well, I would say one note I would make here is the current guidance secretary. That position is an increase, but there's also a decrease elsewhere in the budget where we actually eliminated an admin assistant in the budget.
I would add also that that position has grown. It is a big job. They're not only doing partially the Medicaid clerk work, they're also the guidance secretary, which seems to be a very demanding job, but they're also in charge of food service management, not food service management, but food service related free and reduced price application, that process at the school level, which is a very involved process at points in time throughout the year, and takes a lot of attention to detail to make sure student statuses are reflected appropriately in Power School and such. So it's
gone from being more part-time to being more full-time.
Does that person work some in the summer when Tyler
Yes.
mentioned there?
That was not the case before, but because food service and Medicaid is part of the job now, that is the case.
So moving on to health services. This is obviously nursing and physical and mental health services, activities to provide students with appropriate medical and dental services. You can see the FTEs here for nurses. You will notice that it says a second professional is moved to Medicaid. That was a nursing position that technically is ESSER funded, but we, after some discussion, that would be a good place to move or for the use of Medicaid funding once the ESSER funding is dried up. And so we've just made a note there that we've moved that to Medicaid. You'll see that funding down below in the grant funding sources actually under Medicaid right now, but currently we're funding it with ESSER.
So are you saying the person's been there, we're just paying them in a different place?
This is an additional nurse actually, but we're currently paying them with ESSER, but when ESSER's dried up, our plan is to potentially continue that, but we would use a source of Medicaid funding instead. If you remember, I think I've discussed this before in regards to current year financials, that we've really ceased utilizing ESSER funding for anything outside of the after school program support right now to kind of, it's one of those very flexible, it's our most flexible source of funding that we have. I'm sort of, keeping that to the side and pooling it to help us when, these COVID related funding sources dry up for anything that we might need.
You mean Medicaid is the
Medicaid.
I think you said ESSER.
Oh,
But
sorry.
you meant Medicaid.
So Laura, when you say it's a new position, it's going to be added for next year?
They're
It's
there
added
now.
It's there now. We needed a second nurse in at MVU. And it's 100% paid for with ESSER funding.
Because I'm looking at anticipated is pretty much what we budgeted.
Yes, because that nurse has been moved now to Medicaid. I was just pointing that out now. So that salary is now in a different line below under grant funding, under Medicaid funding, and not in this line. That's just a reminder to us that there's a nurse also floating under Medicaid that we moved there. Part of the jigsaw.
Well, it looks the same because it is the same. It's just the additional nurses in Medicaid now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry if I'm adding to the confusion.
No, we make a lot of changes to make it work.
Watch the bouncing ball.
Oh my goodness. We're trying to get the most out of the revenue that we can so that we can do the best job we can for in this tough budget year.
See, my problem is I see an increase of 57. I'm looking, where is the decrease of 57? It ain't gonna happen, right?
In some lines it does, Don, but it's very difficult right now to identify that. You have to kind of you have to go down the rabbit hole to find it.
All right. I believe you.
Yeah. I've shared now just today with Julie the backup spreadsheets, the 47 tab backup spreadsheets to these documents so she can dig in further because she was interested. She was really happy about that actually.
Made my day.
But those are the rabbit holes. Moving on to psychological services. So this is the portion that's the general education portion of psychological services, and also the portion that's not currently funded with grant or IDIB grant funding. So a very small portion of the psychologist services here, but you can see the FTEs. Just 5% is funded with Gen Ed. Moving down to behavior management. We have been more consistent with what we're charging to behavior management, again, trying to align our schools. So some of the increase to these lines is because of that over time, but also just student needs have increased. This is services and supports to support student behavior and management. Starting with the 141 and 151, which is the behavior management professional line. You can see the FTEs here. It does include some additional support at MVU, the HHV coordination. It also is a shift of addition of a couple of BCBAs in Swanton, or proposed for addition of some BCBAs for MVSD, primarily in Swanton. We may move those to special ed, depending on.
We probably will.
They will be working primarily with special ed students, but that would take the place of an NCSS management contract that we currently have that costs us about $100,000 to manage autism services. On top of the autism service providers, the CAT workers that provide those services, we have a management contract, and that would take the place of those, but it would be an employee versus a purchase service.
That's a good example of where, and we may dig into some of these things in executive session, but that's an example of, we have a really big, expensive consulting contract for $100,000 that mostly covers needs in Swanton for our elementary kids. And we really also have, and what a BCBA is, a board certified behavior analyst. They're a professional, licensed professional, not a teacher, but a professional licensed person that can do ABA, applied behavioral analysis, with our intensive, either children with emotional disturbance or children with autism. We, instead of paying so much for contracts, want to hire our own people that can then train our paras and our behavior interventionists and can work consistently with the special ed department and with principals. But it's really about moving toward developing our own people instead of just always relying on contracts, because one of the things that's just so evident this year is NCSS can't find anyone either. So then we just have this very expensive contract we have for consultation. We're not getting as much consultation as we used to get. So we'd like to have our own person. We're not getting anyone who's really training our paras. And they also will sometimes say, gee, we'd love to give you a CAT worker or an autism person, but we don't have anybody. So we really need to, we will always have contracts because there will always be kids who need that, but we want to start developing. We've cut some other things so that we can develop our own people and hire our own professionals.
Julie, would that person work out of central office or be at a particular school?
No, I think that they would work out of schools, probably one at MVU and one at Swanton, just because of space, but they would travel. They'd travel to wherever the teams are that need them.
Okay.
Hey, Laura, it's Steve.
Sure.
Should we have a subtotal line there? Just because it looks like a pretty big number.
Subtotal line.
It's missing.
Down under the variance.
You can't see it, Laura, in there.
I just went down. Is that what he's talking about? Subtotal for behavior management?
Under 294.
It just is across a page break, Steve. If you go down a few more lines, you'll see it.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This document that I'm sharing with you is page break, so I can print it out. So that's
okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I tried to scroll down now. Yes.
All right. Thanks.
So I did, before we move down to the bottom section, though, I just wanted to say, so we did notice when Julie and I were reviewing this that the HHB, so the hazing, harassment, and bullying position that we have hired is fully funded with ESSER right now, that is charged to ESSER. It is included in this general fund budget as well. But the offsetting revenue is not on the revenue side currently. So when I show you the revenue sheet that I shared, that revenue is actually not there, and I will correct that next time. It doesn't make a significant difference, obviously, but I just wanted to let you know. Also, in regards to that position, MVU offset a portion of that position already. So in regards to that reconfiguration, trying to absorb these costs in the future with another, I'm sorry, I don't know the title, Julie.
It was a student support position that the person left mid-year, and the hourly rate for that person is just over half what the other is. So we're making internal adjustments and not filling a position to help sustain this one. I'm trying to sustain absolutely everything that we add that's not a temporary position, or potentially even not a temporary position.
Before we move on, I guess I'm having trouble wrapping my head around the increase in this category. Because compared to both budget and anticipated, it's way up.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I see the salaries going up, but I don't see the purchase services going down if we're shifting from purchase services to hiring people. Like, is there an offset somewhere? Is there a reclassification that's not in this category?
Well, I would say, for example, the reason why I'm suggesting to Laura that the two BCBA positions move to special ed is that's where the offset is. And it's not necessarily that you're going to see a decrease 100%, but there's $100,000 contract that was in special ed that won't be.
And again, I can tell you, since the merger and then the pandemic partial year, staffing shortages because of the pandemic, this has become almost as fluid as the area of special ed. And so right now, I think, to use Swanton as an example, they have many waitlisted students. So there's contracts that we can't get fulfilled. So we're constantly shifting and looking at, can we find an employee? Can we get a temporary employee? Can we have a contracted service? Some of that I can charge the contracted service to ESSER because right now it is in response. We can't find any staff, or the purchase service can't come through, but it might be a more short-term contract. So some of that is also coming into play, is just that kind of supply and demand, or how can we fulfill services for students? Whereas before, we knew we had 4 SBBC contracts or 3 CAT contracts or 2 homeschool coordinator contracts with NCSS, and every year they would fill them, and we would know the cost, and they would get fulfilled, and we would expend the expense. It has not been that way. Julie and I were talking about that again, that it's just been so fluid with them not being able to fill contracts. And I'm using NCSS obviously as an example. Other providers are having the same issues.
Yep. Another example is in Highgate, we have 2 folks that are professionals in that behavior management line. It says 1, but it's really 2. I think in previous year, one of them used to be replace the assistant principal role. And I'm not sure that position was accounted for under behavior management.
One is in 141 and one is in 161, Julie. That's why.
Okay.
That's why it's 1 FTE in both.
Yep. There we go. I'm not sure that the 1 FTE in the top in 151 was accounted in that line this current.
Oh, okay. Okay. I understand.
Right.
Yep.
For example.
Yep. So I'm sure that doesn't clearly answer your question, Devin, and I apologize. I think it's again a melting pot of a lot of different things, and the additional support needed right now for students and how we're meeting those needs is part of this.
Yeah, and I was just doing the quick math, like that would need something like a 30 or 40% vacancy rate in this group. And I don't know if that sounds like what you're observing or not.
I can, I'm not sure if Justina is on, but I'm sure she can speak to the waitlisted services that are Swanton is currently experiencing with NCSS.
That sounds about right. Maybe I'd say more. It's really hard.
Okay.
And it's difficult, Devin, because, will they be able to fill them next year? Is the cost going to go somewhere else? So are the student needs not going to go down? We know that, or we're fairly certain of that. So it's hard. I'm not even budgeting for all of them to be filled in this budget. I'm kind of playing the middle because just like paras, we may not fill them all. We always have vacancies, especially now. We consistently have 10 vacancies with support staff. So I'm trying to pick somewhere in the middle that I think is responsible, but not. It's
And I
tricky.
will say, just to add on that, I think sometimes too, we come up with an alternative solution, or find someone to staff. And then in particular in the central building with the older kids, we've had a lot of high needs move in this year that come with those services already in place, maybe from Chittenden County area, and trying to continue those services up here is really hard too.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you.
And as always, in any of these categories, if anyone wants to dig down deeper and see backup spreadsheets or detailed expense reports or anything like that, always more than willing to provide any of that if it helps clarify. Moving down to 2213 or professional development. This is all the costs basically under general education or under this fund that we're looking at, which is for the purpose of training our instructional staff, including in-service training, workshops, conference, and college courses. So this includes, the contracted professional and support agreement, professional development costs. This has been a pool. This used to be when all the separate school budgets merged. They were in all different places. A lot were in instructional, but they were under different object codes. Now we have a function 2213. All costs are here, easily to track, whether we choose to send them or it's a contracted benefit, they're all here, which is making my life a lot easier. And Lisa Way in my office is doing a fantastic job making sure all that paperwork is done and timely and managed extremely tightly, which I appreciate. We by no means budget for every teacher to take what they are allotted. So just to be clear on that as well, we go on what actuals have been or historical spending. Mentoring services, again, this has been a bit of a shift. These costs were all over before we merged, but this is for the mentoring of new staff. And Julie, I don't know if you want to speak to those costs at all. It's not something I'm
In mentoring services?
Yes.
That's a great example where there would be memos of understanding for teachers to do additional work above their contracting. So if I'm an experienced teacher, I meet, I've forgotten what the flat rate we finally come to. It used to be every school paid a different amount and some schools paid nothing and some schools, so we have a flat rate that teachers are paid for mentoring, and it's work that they do above and beyond. And they meet with their teachers, weekly, monthly, et cetera. And they also meet with the principals to see how things are going.
I would just add that another frustration with the new chart of accounts is, okay, you can put all of your MOUs in one place under instruction, but mentoring is going to have its own function. Not the rest, just mentoring. And that's required. So next is 2220 library services, costs associated with managing and supervising educational media services. So this is all of our library and media staff. You will notice, and this is probably an item for executive session at a later time, but there are some changes reflected here under support staff. We do have some upcoming retirements.
I didn't hear.
This does include an additional professional librarian in Swanton in this draft.
What do you do with the two ladies that are there now as assistants?
They are retiring.
They're retiring.
Both of them?
Yes.
Yes.
Wow. So the librarians won't have that type of support service then?
Yes, and we can talk about that more in executive session.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine with me. It's just that that was a real sticky wicket back a few years ago. Okay. Does Franklin have a full-time librarian now?
No.
No.
There's one in this budget though?
No, they have a support staff member.
Okay.
Who is not retiring, to my knowledge.
Okay, because again, going back to equity, they do have services then that Joyce feels comfortable with.
Yes, she does.
So Laura and Julie, what's the one FTE MVU mean?
Again, I think we need to talk about some of these things in executive
Okay,
session
all right,
because.
good.
we're-
That's why I
we're-
raised it at
yep.
the beginning, because that's
Yep.
fine with me. Yep.
Okay, so moving down to technology services, I would say that as you know, this is the school base. So you'll see the note here as these are school-based technology services. Later on, you will see administrative technology services, which has been a big kind of area of movement since the new chart of accounts has come out. But these are technology activities and services that support instruction. So this is not management technology such as PowerSchool or SchoolSpring or some of these other softwares that we use to manage our schools, but this is instructional support and the people that do that work. So you can see salaries here, and then a lot of the expenses are down under supplies, etc. We've worked hard. I know Robert is on right now. We're working hard with the tech team, and Robert is as well. And I appreciate him for his support in getting inventories made and really reviewing software and application expenses and looking at usage and where we can really maximize some of these resources. And I really appreciate that support. And I know the tech team is working really hard through that process. The big one I would say is the equipment lease. I would like to highlight that right now. That is something that we had funded with, so it's a 443 under this school-based technology. We have flowed some of that through previous ESSER funding. I don't know how I'll continue to do that. Originally, when we got the CRF funding, the original COVID related, and we weren't sure, you know, what was going to happen with expenses or how the pandemic was going to play out. Technology was a very easy allocation for COVID related expenses. And so we funded a big technology purchase, one to support, you know, devices going home and covers and stuff for units to be going home, but also our normal lease. So that's why that line looks like it's down. The real lease amount is the 95,000 currently. Principal's office. So this is your principal's expense, salaries and benefits, department leaders, and other office personnel. So your office staff, as well as, I mean, some small supply lines. The other big thing, I guess, that's in this line that I guess maybe would be unexpected is we've moved all communication expenses here under 531. And so that's all telephone and internet services. That was another thing that some schools had charged under plant, some put under principal's office, some had under instruction. And so we've cleaned that up here. So this would be all of those expenses under 531. But again, FTEs and such are outlined under the notes. 2590, this is just a central place that's required now for workers' comp for all of our schools. And then another big one. So 2610 is plant operation and maintenance. So this is costs associated with keeping physical plants open and clean, maintaining safety in grounds and buildings and equipment. So this is all the way up to pretty significant maintenance and repairs. So we've, as well as, you know, obviously custodial supplies and custodial supports and staffing and facility directors and such. You can see there's quite an extensive list here under the 400s where we're required to break down things like water and sewer and snow plowing and rubbish and rentals on buildings, which includes all of our storage units and things like that. Tractor leases on equipment. So this is quite an extensive line. I do want to bring your attention down under the supplies and materials, furniture and fixtures, because we've done a lot of work in these areas under the 600s primarily, actually the 400s as well, in making sure that these are properly funded. So the purchase services, purchase repair and maintenance, 431 in supplies and furniture and fixtures is properly funded. And I work pretty closely with the facility directors to make sure that they know what's included in these lines. We did share all of that information with the facility task force at the last meeting when we were looking at budget priorities as well. We kind of had an in-depth conversation about what was technically repairs, maintenance, normal budget items, things like replacing doors on cycles, classrooms on cycles, fixtures, certain amount of furniture, tiling on the floor, lighting, so much that would cycle through each year and be normal maintenance versus larger scale capital projects. So
Laura, why is 431 231 dropping down, we're going to use only 250? Is that to date? I mean, that number
That's
250,
that's to date, Don. Yep, that's to date.
but you don't have any way of anticipating what's in the future?
Well,
I mean, I know
do, but
anticipated usually means also projected. I guess I kind of.
It does. I mean, obviously this is a tricky area because some of that repair and maintenance is for things that we might not know about, things that happen. And also I would say that again, due to the pandemic, we've been overly cautious with what maintenance we allowed to have happen. So, I worked very closely with facility directors to probably be overly cautious in the maintenance that was happening. This was back when they were limiting vendors being in the building, and we were trying not to disrupt summer services due to COVID. And we knew, so there's a lot of things coming into play here, but I would anticipate that this will be fully expended by the end of the year.
I would hope so, because to end a year on maintenance with a lot of money, 100 and some odd thousand, doesn't look good as far as all the things we want to do. So, okay.
Yeah. This is the time of the year, Don, where I work with them, and we already are actually on making those recommendations and having those final discussions. Like, hey, okay, we're underspent here. We held back on some of these projects beginning of the school year due to the uncertainty of COVID or whatever. But now we will address them and utilize those funds for sure.
Laura, can I ask you a question? It has it's a follow-up on what Don was saying. So I had thought that this meant projected, the anticipated. So would you say it does mean projected? And I think it's going to be important when we reach the end and people say, well, wait a second, what happened to all that money had left over? So is this going to be anticipated, projected, and maybe not as much in this area because you haven't had a chance to talk to all the building people? But yes, in the other areas, it is more.
Definitely under salaries and benefits and any of those 100, 200 objects, we are encumbered yes. So the largest expenses, some of these, especially like I said, because of the pandemic and what's happened with COVID, we've been a little bit cautious. We've slowed down a little bit, or we've shifted some funding. But yes, primarily these are what I anticipate at this one point in time.
Yeah, you're really good about it. I mean, I know from history that you're really good at anticipating what the cost will be by June. So it's got to be.
Well, if you ask my facility or the facility directors, I think they'll tell you that I'm overly cautious, but then I'm not, and I say, hurry up.
Gotcha.
So we'll see what it is in June. I'll make a note. We'll check at the June meeting to see if we spent it all. Good.
Yep. Nope, I don't. The facility money, we definitely have plenty of needs. So.
That's right.
Yep. I will tell you that furniture and fixtures is becoming an issue. We have orders that were placed months and months and months ago that have still not been received, or were received and there was an issue with the order. They're sitting on a boat somewhere. So, there are some things that I don't have control over. And if they don't get received in this fiscal year and the PO gets canceled, or, but I will tell you that I have, Anne Marie is following up with facility directors on those very consistently to say, what's the status? But, some of those orders can be upwards of $50,000 and not all of those have been received yet.
So pupil transportation?
Yep. 2711 pupil transportation. So this is all the costs associated with conveying students to and from school, tech centers, athletics, and field trips. The biggest expense, of course, is the 519. That's a daily transportation. We are, and this is in my notes, my budget notes as well, that we will be needing to go out to bid again this year. We extended our contract last year 1 year, but we will need to go back out to bid. So we're using a conservative increase here. I would say that this does include transportation other, so that top amount 518 does include out of district placement transportation, and that is quite significant. It's around $8,000 a student when we have them going somewhere else to receive their education, and so that is primarily what that's made up of.
And that would be general ed student transportation.
General ed students, yep. And then there's the same line under special ed, yep.
Correct.
Yeah, so that's a good point, Julie. Like we're hitting all of these functions right now under the general fund or the 101 fund. The same ones will be under, well, primarily the same ones will be under special ed as well. Food service support, 3,100. This is, as we know, Franklin does not contract with a food service management company. They have a wonderful in-house program that they run, and historically we have subsidized their health insurance for the individuals there. And so that's what's in that line. Okay, so now we're moving into central office. We have curriculum and instruction. That's costs associated with assisting instructional staff with content in the process of providing learning experiences for students. Curriculum coordination, salary, and benefits. Only 50% is here. 50% is actually charged to CFP, or the title grant funds below. Small amount of supplies and such that are associated with that. Nothing major at all. Professional development and training. So this is the small portion.
Before you leave curriculum, the salary, where's the rest of the salary? Because nobody's working for 46,000.
Down below under the grant fund. So this is just the central office fund 1110. We have to divide it by funds. So she's down below under grants and under Title IV.
Okay, thank you.
So this is professional development for central office staff, basically, under 2213. Board of Education. So this is where the expenses are for board member stipends, as well as the moderator and the
Board secretary.
Board secretary and treasurer. Thank you.
Yep.
Also annual report printing. Which they didn't bill us. The reason that's zero is the bill came late. And so that was actually not paid last year. We have to figure that out. Sorry, what'd you say, Julie?
The treasurer has their own line.
Oh yeah, right below, sorry. Yep. And then audit services, we've updated that amount to the current year. We had anticipated an increase because of all the extra auditing that was necessary because of the federal grant requirements and the threshold, but most of that did not, and as well as our fixed asset support, but that did not come to fruition. So they're level funding yet again. Oops, legal services. Legal services, costs associated with legal services necessary to keep the district activities in compliance with any and all federal, state, and local regulations. We keep some money in there. Negotiation support, honestly, I've talked about reducing this. We do not have legal counsel attend our negotiation sessions right now, where we used to have them attend every meeting. Julie does a great job, and as well as our committee. And so I potentially could reduce those lines as an area if we needed to make some cuts, but like to have some funds available if it was needed. General administration. So this is costs associated with general overall administration to direct and manage all affairs of the district, includes the superintendent and support positions. You can see those listed here. I think it's pretty self-explanatory what positions are included. All non-union support right now, or all non-union positions, I should say, are including a 3% increase. That's up for discussion purposes. Obviously, that's always a placeholder that we use every year, and then the board can direct me to do differently. But it's just a completely for
Budgeting purposes.
Budgeting purposes. Yep.
Fiscal services.
Fiscal services. Well, that would be me and the finance office. As well as your payroll and accounts payable professionals. I will say that the only other thing in here is this tax anticipation note line of credit interest every year. But most of that is offset, obviously, especially this year with the revenue we receive from how that account is set up, which is nice. 2570 personnel services and human resources. So this is our human resource department. So again, you can see on the left here, that's our clerical support, admin assistant, our benefits coordinator, and our human resources coordinator. I can tell you over the course of the last couple of years, we are getting our money's worth with all the things they are dealing with because of the pandemic and staffing issues and hiring and turnover and different types of leave. And it's been a nightmare. Okay, so here's the technology line that's not instructional or school-based that I was explaining to you earlier. This is a technology services or administration of technology, costs associated with supporting information tech systems, including support and maintaining info systems and data support. So a lot of this is a shift. We're trying to really streamline where we're charging different expenses and come up with a really clear understanding of that. And so this is our larger systems that we manage, such as Infinite Visions that we use for our finance and HR management. It's Power School that we use for our data management. It's Destiny that we use in our library to manage those resources. We have some support from the tech group. That's a management service that they provide as far as our security and offsite support. I will say that there is the addition of a MVSD wide network coordinator, and there are some changes to staffing that have happened, obviously significant changes to staffing this year that are being impacted or that have influenced these lines. Tech support in our schools and all of our schools, I believe, has shifted to different staff. And so there's been some changes there. But the addition of this MVSD wide network coordinator is currently also being funded with ESSER. But we have shown that cost here. I don't know if Robert is on and wants to talk about that at all, but.
I am on. I'll entertain any questions. I wasn't planning to talk specifically about anything, but if we have any questions, I can address them.
District-wide services, 2590. So this is just, again, some basic unemployment. I will say I'm very, very excited about having unemployment insurance through VisBit. So I have a firm number to put on that line of $15,000 because it's already contracted for under the 261. So I appreciate that. But other things like workers' compensation and liability insurance are here. Plant operation and maintenance. Again, this is just the central office portion of that. The biggest one would be the rental of office space under 441, $40,000. Okay, so as we said, now we're moving into the special ed fund. Many of these are going to be exactly as you saw above, except these are the special ed portions. So the portions that are reflected in an IEP are going to be tied into an IEP or directly to student support. Since we are moving away from a cost reimbursable model, or whether they reimburse us a portion of our expenses and we're moving to a block grant, we've tried to be very cautious about what we charge here. I mean, we always have, but even more so, trying to shift and prepare ourselves for that change in revenue or that change in programming. But we still charge, obviously, our special educators and special ed paraprofessionals to these lines, as well as some behavior interventionists. In regards to one of the questions that I had in regards to FTEs, as I said, there really overall have not been changes to total FTEs. But in regards to special ed support, 3 times a year, I believe, any support staff are required to complete time samples of how they spend their time. And so we budget for a portion of the support staff, so professionals, behavior interventionists, to be under gen ed and a portion to be under this special ed fund. Based on those time samples, we then move them around. So we create a percentage at the end of the year and I charge them where they actually did their work. So it looks like there's a large increase here to special ed paraprofessionals, but you don't see much of an increase under the gen ed paraprofessionals. And that a lot of that right now has to do with special ed is absorbing more of the increase to salaries than the gen ed is, because we're basing that on how we thought they were going to be utilized. So it can be quite fluid in those 2 areas. So I just wanted to point that out. And I know you've heard me say that before. I'm just looking at other things, there's tutoring. If we look down, there is student tuition here, no student tuition in non-private schools. There's actually none, but private LEAs, we do have tuition here.
And we did have a question about this. We do have a large number. Part of why we're trying to make some changes with our behavior systems is because we have a lot of kids that end up in out-of-district placements. some of the increase is actually because the out-of-district placements at the high school level weren't even open fully in previous years because of the pandemic. But, you know, we do have a lot of students at MVU that go out. Part of that has to do with their age and also the availability of supports for students at that age that come into the school. So, you know, we do a lot to support kids in school, but if there's no continuum of placements for kids at that age, it gets harder, as you can understand. So that is something that is in the front of Tanya's mind at all times, is how do we create systems of support for particularly our middle high school age students who end up in out-of-district placements. And what can we do besides creating our own new school? So that is something that we are consistently working on.
And so we have the special ed portion of psychological costs that's included in the, well, actually, sorry, there's $0. The rest is under Idea B. Never mind, we covered that already. There used to be a small portion here. Actually, there is just down here under professional services, funding for outside psychological consultants and services as needed. So there's some purchase services here. A lot of that, I will say also, if you look at what's anticipated, I'm flowing as much of that through ESSER as I can as well. And so that anticipated number for the current year is down. 2151, we have speech and audiology services for special ed, costs associated with identification, assessment, and treatment of students with speech, hearing, and language impairments. All of our SLPs, or speech and language pathologists, are here. Occupational therapy services, those have moved to grant Idea B grants. The reason it's still here is because there was actually a fiscal year 21 expense. We're waiting for that to phase out. Pretty much the same thing with physical therapy. So OTPT is primarily with Idea B funding. We have curriculum and instruction under special ed. This is our adaptive curriculum coordinator salary and benefits here. Well, 20%, I should say 80% is under grant funding as well. That's Heidi Mosier. Same thing. We have a 2213, a professional development line for special educators. Just kind of skipping through some blank spots. Special ed administration. So we're on 2490. This is costs associated with the administration to direct and supervise operations of all the special ed administration and alternative programs, maintain records. So this is our special ed coordinator and assistant coordinator, one FTE each. One is housed at MVU, one is here at central office. Just some small other lines, human resources. This is for non-instructional staff PD that they may need. Again, a workman's compensation line and special ed transportation. This would be the special ed portion that Julie was talking about for special ed students that are in out of district placements. That would be under the special ed fund rather than the gen ed. Moving into Fund 1214, Early Childhood Program. So this is our ECP program, costs associated with direct instruction to gen ed pre-K students. So this is our classroom teachers in ECP, the paras, it's their benefits and wages, supporting services, supplies, and equipment. There will also be a corresponding special ed line for ECP as well, which you can see FTEs for staffing here. I will draw your attention to 562. That's the Act 166 General Ed Universal Pre-K tuition. You can see that keeps growing and growing. It's actually down a little bit this year, again, because of COVID. We think some families are not sending students, but we are anticipating that to go up next year. And so has the allotment. The rate for fiscal year 23 is $3,656. I think it was up $100 and something.
It's also important to note that one of the largest public partner sites in our region closed last year in St. Albans. So that's a problem for our community.
Same thing. They have some OT, PT services that we budget for. They have their instructional staff and training under 2213. The same thing, they have some technology support for the early childhood program. Audit services and legal services have all been centralized. And then we have ECP under 2490, ECP Program Administration. This is for the directing and supervising of all the operations of the early childhood program. You can see that salary there, and the admin assistant as well. Again, some small supply lines and such, but a very meager budget really for the program that they're operating. We try to subsidize that any way that we can. Please stop me if I'm scooting over something. I'm just trying, in the interest of time, trying to move a little bit faster. I'm sure you're sick of listening to me. Early childhood special eds, same thing. This would be the special ed portion of ECP. So this would be the special educators and paraprofessionals, benefits and wages. Same thing, speech and audiology services, instructional staff training. So really just the same thing, but under a different fund, such as special ed. This is just the ECP portion. Now we get into the grant funded portion. So this is where we identify the primarily portions of salaries and benefits that we moved into the budget kind of to protect them, but they are offset with grant funding, either IDIB, CFG, or Medicaid. And so here you'll see under 1201, this is IDIB funded teachers. This is cost for pre-K special education, full-time teachers, salary and benefits. So we're actually charging a special educator there for the pre-K program. There is a pre-K IDIB below, but it's a very small portion. Here's the other portion of the IDIB funded psychological services. So you can see FTEs here, that a portion of was up above. Same thing with OT and PT that we talked about. You can see those FTEs there. The portion of adaptive curriculum under 2212 that we talked about. It's Heidi Mosier. And then we have here's the IDIB portion of the preschool portion of the IDIB grant, excuse me, that helps support some paraprofessional costs in the early childhood program. And then moving down into title, and this is a little confusing, and I just want to be upfront about that because there's again, shifting funding sources, shifting who we're supporting with what grant and all of that. And some of this reflects positions that we will probably utilize CFP funding for. Let me find one down here. So this one, for instance, right now under Title 2A for intervention, we're funding Julie Curtis right now is ESSER funded. So she's an interventionist that's currently ESSER funded. We're including her here. But right now she's being paid for with ESSER, and I'm showing ESSER revenue on the revenue side instead of CFP, but this is sort of her placeholder for that position. But not to skip over anything. This is primarily title is for intervention support, literacy and math. I think the FTEs are filled in primarily, small portions. These do change from year to year, I will say. Curriculum administration. So there is a portion of our curriculum coordination, salary and benefits that's funded with title dollars. That's here. That wasn't up above, Don. I think you had asked me about where that was. Same, it's also under Title 4, but also Title 2A is also funding portions of the interventionists, literacy and math. This is the portion, I believe, that is not intervention. Actually, it's the coaching portion. Just trying to think of highlights, and please stop me, but oh, here's one. So under Title 4 grant, here we have the PLP teacher currently. Again, a little bit confusing because currently the personalized learning plan teacher at MVU, it was in the budget to be offset with grant revenue, the title revenue. We're currently funding that position with ESSER dollars because it makes sense. And we've shifted around some of the title funding, but again, a placeholder, and we eventually will probably continue to fund that with CFP dollars or title funding dollars in the future. The school improvement is gone. We'll remove that.
Laura, can I ask you a question? Laura?
Sure. Sure.
If you're using ESSER funding now instead of the grant funding, do you lose the grant funding or are you spending it on something else?
We're spending it on something else, and we can carry over some of that funds, some of those funds.
Wow.
But we are actually still, as recent as today, Marnie was working on an amendment to continue to review expenses, contract that could be filled versus, or could be fulfilled versus employees that actually we had an employee leave mid-year that changed that situation. And so we're constantly filing amendments and looking at the sources, but we can roll over some of those dollars as well.
A lot of pieces moving around here. It's really incredible what you've accomplished. Thank you.
Very good team for sure. School improvement grant is gone again. I think if you look at 21, that would be there. Here's our Medicaid reimbursement. You can see the portion that we're actually anticipating the expense for here for fiscal year 23 is actually just the after school support portion that we fund. And the rest of it is kind of being set aside as much as possible. Here's that Medicaid nurse. I will say that we know is ESSER funded right now, but that's why it was not increased up above under the more general fund. That salary's here. We will eventually potentially fund it with Medicaid, but right now it is ESSER funded. Medicaid clerk support, and then we get down, so those are all the grants. Then we get down to Fund 3007. This is construction and renovations. This category now has its own fund that is required, the 4,700. But this is that line that the board has made some investments in over the last couple of years. This year it's $100,000 more than last year, and this is to handle some of those things that are larger than repair and maintenance, but smaller than something that might go to bond or that we might look at performance contracting for. So for instance, we upgraded the boilers this year in Franklin with this money and did some HVAC work there. And so that was what this was utilized for. I would like to put a little plug in that I do support the increase in this line. I think strategically, I know some other school districts are doing it. Maple Run has $1 million line right now in their budget because we are all realizing that we can't just wait to bond in our plant or facility budgets alone don't cover some of these other things. So if we can start covering some of the smaller scale projects with a line in our budget, that probably makes the most sense. So I very much appreciate the increase here, and I know the facility directors do as well. Lastly, Fund 4001, this is long-term debt service. This is the principal and interest on our bonds that we're currently paying on. This is longer, anything over a year, but basically this is our facility bonds right now. And I will point out that it's Franklin's last year for fiscal year 23 is Franklin's last year on their bond. So it's a very minimal payment that they have this year, but then they will be done. So, again, I did above and beyond this kind of really thorough overview. I did also reiterate all of the big changes that I thought were included in the draft so far in the draft 5 notes page. And I think we'll talk about those further in executive session, some of them, but mostly I was just reiterating, increases to salaries and benefits and contracts and things like that, just as a reminder to have it all in one place. I did also outline those retirements, Dawn, and the ESSER funded positions that we've included as well.
Thank you.
So Laura, do you want to move to the estimated revenue and tax rate calculation?
People still want to listen to me.
I know that was a lot, but it's just really best to do as deep a dive as we can so people can really walk through.
Okay, so with draft 5, you can see current year here in the current year column, and then next year, this is based on draft 5. We have a $2.3 million increase in projected expenditures. A good portion of that is, I think, 5.5%. So it's a little over 6%, but 5.5% of that is salary and benefit increases that include the ESSER positions. But about 650,000 or 640,000 of that is offset with revenue below for ESSER as well. But primarily this is benefit and salary increases. And then we are looking at your anticipated revenues. Again, you can see the estimated offsetting ESSER revenue here. Revenues are fairly consistent. I'd say the big change is the ESSER funding. The unreserved fund balance is, going down from 2.3 to 1.9. Not a huge change, but again, a pretty significant unreserved fund balance, obviously. But then another main big change, I guess, or something to draw your attention to for our district, it's not that large of a change, but it's the shift in special ed funding from a reimbursement model to a block grant. For us, it's a small decrease, but Julie and I were reviewing some other districts today, and for some districts, it's much more significant. So we're pretty happy that that's only a modest decrease for us anticipated. The extraordinary cost reimbursement, we know we will still receive that. We don't typically budget for it, but it has been fairly significant over the last couple of years, and we're managing those expenses very, very well now. Marnie does an exceptional job tracking all those high cost kids with a specific code now. And so we're doing a really great job managing that. So I feel comfortable anticipating $250,000 here. I'm hoping it is more. We will receive the triple E. We still will receive the triple E grant. That was an area of question when the discussions were happening around changing to the special ed block grant, but that is still happening. So overall projected revenues are actually up about 206,000. That's primarily, again, because of the ESSER offset. Education spending overall is up about 2.1 million. Equalized pupils, as you can see here, that we did receive another version of the equalized pupils. They're projected to be down 31.66. I'm hoping that's a very short-term problem for us. Even with the waivers, I think what's having the impact here is our ADM being influenced by the increase in homeschool students that we had during the height of the pandemic, which we're anticipating those kids either have come back or will come back. And also the pre-K students that maybe waited another year to come into the pre-K program or to access child pre-K services. So we believe that's what's influencing these numbers. The data has been reviewed. I know many business managers and superintendents are concerned about these lower than usual equalized pupil numbers or ADM numbers, but I have talked with Rusty. He's confident in our reporting, and these are not frozen yet. They're supposed to be by the Agency of Ed, and they have not been frozen yet, but this is what we have to work with right now. But it does have a negative impact on the tax rate, obviously.
Laura?
Go ahead, Don.
No, you finish up, Julie, and I just want to make a statement.
I just wanted to make a point that in my review of the weighting study that has just come out, the report to the legislature, I have a webinar that I've participated in, and I have a video of it as well. We are likely, when it all depends on what the legislature really does, but these are the antiquated weights. Missisquoi Valley School District will likely be a winner. And I hate to say winners and losers, but when you're changing the weights, some schools will have less weights and some will have more. I do think that we come out on the positive side on every scenario I've looked at. Not huge, but I do think that we can expect, if anything remotely like the report going to the legislature this January comes true, I do expect this to improve for us.
That's good news, because I just want to talk. I talked with Laura about this, so this is not a surprise to her. I hope it's not a surprise to her, but I'm really concerned about our numbers. I mean, we can't add to them, I don't think, anyways. And I do agree with Laura somewhat. You know, we've lost homeschool kids. Pandemic has hit us. I hope they come back. But when I was looking at our district numbers, we have been running in the 130s, maybe 140s, 130s for years. And our current sophomore MVU is 112. So even if every homeschool kid came back, and I don't think that'll happen, the sophomore class, as they move in through the system to go out when they leave, that's really going to be tough. And I don't think it should have a major impact on what we do tonight or with our budget. But when I was looking at that.
Oh, we've lost you, Don. That cohort of kids has been lower than the other cohorts for some reason over the past 4 or 5 years. But
Right.
yeah, we
I'm a
do, look, we did lose about 57 students to homeschooling, and average daily membership also has to do with attendance.
Right.
And attendance has been awful this year across the state. So all of those pieces, not only, who's registered, but also who's in attendance, has had a negative impact across Vermont. I mean, we're better than some schools in terms of the hit, but it's big for us. It's definitely big, and it's affecting our spending per equalized pupil.
No, and I agree with everything you and Laura said. As I say, as I looked at that, it just seemed that in the perfect storm, we don't need an extra perfect storm with one grade being down so much, but I'm sure we'll work through it.
Yeah, like Julie said, Don, actually, I think it's been down historically. So if anything, once that class graduates, it should actually help us if our numbers stay consistent with the pre-K kids and the kids coming in and the enrollment staying consistent, which hopefully it will. It would help us financially, I should say. I don't want to come across the wrong way. And so this would represent an increase to our spending per equalized pupil of $1,452. That's an equalized pupil spending of $16,710. It is an increase, but I did feel it was appropriate when Julie and I were talking today to compare that again to which we typically do to taxpayers, to the fiscal year 22 state average was 17,612. So about $1,000 difference from even last year's state average. And then we got some estimates today, or Julie was working with superintendents on fiscal year 23 estimates for spending per equalized pupil in our neighbor.
Well, okay. I wouldn't want to name them, but I would just say, we are.
Sorry, didn't tell me that part.
We are significantly below in terms of projected equalized pupil spending our neighbors by, more than $1,000 up to $2,000 in some respects. So we hate this percent increase because the board is really trying to move our salaries and wages to a place that is more competitive. And so our spending is coming closer to average. It's still $2,000 below the average, or $1,000 below the average, but we're trying to make some headway there, not be high spending, but to be still in the low average range. And when you look at, and then with the loss of equalized pupils, that made it, that percentage look higher. But as you've heard, we really don't have much in terms of additions. We didn't hire like 5 additional teachers. We've hired some, but there's revenue to offset them. So that's part of the frustration with the equalized pupil and the percentage increase, because we're still significantly below our neighbors and below state average, which you all know.
Carrie, do you have your hand up?
I just wanted to say, I think that this is much better to be closer to the state average, still below it, but closer. I mean, I thought it was terrible when we had some of the lowest cost pupils, because I mean, people may not realize it, but we know from just looking at this that budget salaries are some of the most important, the biggest part of a budget, which told us that we were not paying at all compared to other schools in the state. And so we've made this dedication. We want our kids to be successful. And like you said, Julie, part of the way you do that is have teachers who stay, good teachers who stay. So I don't think we should apologize for the rate of our spending per equalized pupil. Personally, I think it's a very fair to the students and to the taxpayers.
I don't know where we're going next, but I certainly want to thank all of the people that worked on putting this together tonight, because I know Julie and Laura are here, but I'm sure there are other people. And I want to thank you, because I think I know I have a better understanding of the budget than I did before. And I would hope other people thought it was a good use of their time.
Chris, I don't know if you saw Peter had his hand up.
Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, no, I agree with Don. I mean, obviously it's tedious to go through all this, and I know Laura and Julie are going over this every day. So it's a lot, and we appreciate them doing that. I guess my question is, I'm thinking of Kosha and all the work that she's doing trying to catch us up. We know that with kids missing school that we're behind, and I know Julie said we're not adding a lot of positions. Do we have a plan? Are we working towards getting the resources that we need? Are we extra support in the summertime to help catch kids up that are behind? It's just a general question.
Thank you, Peter. You definitely see some of that in the budget. And then you see some that are more temporary tutors, temporary interventionists, temporary, that is just straight coming through ESSER and not necessarily, so we're trying to do a balance of things that we think, for example, some of the counseling kinds of supports. We think that's going to be more than a year, right? And honestly, we do think that there will be a need for some of these interventionists a little bit longer. But then we talk about, okay, can we put that in the consolidated federal grant? Can we use a different funding source, or do we get rid of something we think we don't need to replace it? We have all those conversations. And also, it's hard to find people, Peter, frankly, that are qualified.
No, I knew you have a plan and everything, and there's so much in here. It's hard to understand it all, where it's coming from, but I just wanted to make that statement.
Thank you.
So the only other thing that I wanted to talk about, obviously the property yield is not set in stone yet. We're using the number that was provided from the Agency of Ed. But as you can see here, with the equalized tax rate is actually still going down. So even with our increase of over 9% projected to the net ed spending for equalized pupil, the tax rate is actually still going down 5+ cents until we apply the common level of appraisal. And we did receive those letters from the state today. And as we projected, as the entire state projected, these are not good news. Property values are the sale of properties were at just such a high level compared to the value that it's great if you're selling your house, but if you're not, you're going to get hit with an increase to your taxes. Not significant. I will say that the CLAs, as you can see here, did drop significantly in each of our towns, 4 to 5%, and they're also way below 100%, which is not good. But even after those are taken into account, you can see the tax rates here in pink. Over here, you can see that Franklin would be going up about 2 cents. Highgate would be going up 1.8, and Swanton would actually still be going down 0.56 cents. So not horrible. Thank goodness the yield is at such that it's helping us right now to offset some of the CLA impact. But
Laura, do you know when how low it has to get before it triggers a reappraisal?
I don't remember what the number is. The problem is there's so many towns on that reappraisal list also that they are so far behind. This just came up at a VASBO meeting that it could be 10 years before they catch up.
I looked at the letter today. I think it's 85%.
85.
It used to be mid-80s, so I guess it hasn't changed. But, I don't know how many of you people read the County Courier. About every month, I guess, they give the property sales.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, it's unbelievable. There's another report that shows what it last sold for. So houses that were bought in Swanton 5 years ago for, say, 200,000 are now selling for over 300,000.
Yep.
And certainly some were 10 years old, but it's just unbelievable. And of course, the market's like that everywhere. From what I hear with a few people I work with out of state, but it's good in some ways, but sooner or later it's going to catch up. Good. I'm glad you have the CLA information.
Yeah, I mean, it's not great, but
At
Not
least we
good
know.
information, but it's good to have it.
focusing on our equalized pupil, I mean, our equalized tax rate, I mean, I'm pleased that it's still projected to go down, and I think that's gonna be our message, because it's honestly, this board has worked really hard to increase salaries and wages for our employees, and are in an attempt to keep our best teachers and support staff. And to do that, we we had to make some changes, and the board has asked us to do that in this budget. And that is the majority of the change.
It's 85%. I just looked it up, CLA. If it's 85%.
But there's many towns in Vermont that have hit that threshold years ago and they're still not getting appraised. There's such a shortage. It's a big concern.
Devin,
So, yeah, I mean, bottom line, we have the wild swings there of the yield in the common level appraisal, but Franklin's taxes are going up 1.5%. Highgate's are going up 1 1/3%, and Swanton has a 0.4% reduction. That's kind of a bottom line. So I think those are important numbers for us to highlight. Those are well below the rates of inflation we're seeing elsewhere in the economy right now. So I think it's good we've been able to make the investments and keep that number where it is. I also want to just kind of piggyback on the comment Peter made about student achievement. I think it'd be really helpful for us as we transition to getting this out to the public to hear from some of the administrators on what the priorities are that have been included in here for them. So I think it's an opportunity to do one more sell to us, the board, that this budget includes the things that we know we need to hit our district goals, and also for the final sell to the public to let them know that we've included those priorities that we've been discussing. So putting our money where our mouth is. So we don't need that now for sure. I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but that'd be great to have before we take a vote on it, if that's all right with everyone.
They will all be at that January 16th meeting. To make room for this longer discussion, we put all of the administrators will be giving their reports at the 16th meeting.
January 20th.
January 20th. I don't know why I have the 16th in my head.
16th is Sunday. I don't think anybody will go.
Nope.
Toby, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just kind of, I don't expect anyone to answer this, and I know it's not the only concern, but I'm kind of curious if we're asked, has consolidation saved us anything or improved any type of services for our kids? So I think that's a interesting question that some might ask, because we're 2-3 years into this now, maybe less. And I still think that there's people out there that are going to perhaps say, well, where's the savings? We did these consolidations, whether forced or not. Where's the savings? And I know it's never that simple, but I just think as everybody kind of needs to be ready for that question. So that's just a comment.
Yeah. I hear that often as well. And I think one of the things that's important to point out is we have capacity now to do things we never could do with a smaller single district. So a Highgate or a Franklin or a Swanton, even as a single district, couldn't put in a boiler or hire, have as much access to ESSER funding to hire, full-time substitutes to help cover the absences of staffing. We've been able to be more efficient because we don't have to recreate things. I think that individual school budgets would be seeing, and schools that I know that have not consolidated are struggling with their rising costs and shifts in revenue. And they're not coming out on the positive side with things like the weighting study and things like that, or the special ed finance changes. So I think that it's helped us stay afloat and stay ahead. I think that, with the CLAs the way we are, Swanton, Highgate, Franklin, town people would be looking at very different tax rates. But can I point to a thing? No, that's a challenge, that we're always going to be facing. Chris, I don't know if you want to have, I know that it's late, but I know that there are a couple of questions that came up that you may want to finding for executive session to discuss, because they deal with perhaps a reduction in force, perhaps a change of contract, and perhaps negotiations.
Julie,
Go ahead, Don.
as one of the people that asked that we have a night like this, I found it very worthwhile. And unless somebody has a burning issue, at least the questions I asked that would be answered in executive session, I don't need those answers tonight at 9 o'clock. If the other people want to do it tonight, but if we had a 15 minutes at the end of the next meeting, depending what else we got on there, you'll be a little further along, maybe with some things that you might want us to know. So, if people are sitting there saying, well, Don asked these 2 or 3 questions and now we go executive session, I'm saying, don't do it because of my questions.
Just a note, though, that we do need to finalize at the next meeting. So I want people to be prepared for that.
So with that in mind, I think we should at least attempt to have a quick executive session, just while this is fresh on everyone's minds. So before we go to
Chris, I'm sorry, I just wanted to put a little plug in that Julie and I were talking about one of the next steps on the budget development timeline is the community budget input presentation. And Julie, I didn't know if we needed to decide on a night or a date for that with everyone, or
would probably want to do it next week. Next week, we have a regularly scheduled negotiations meeting. We also have a regularly scheduled board goals meeting. We could maybe piggyback on board goals. But I think it would need to be next week, and it would be a virtual town hall. I don't know that the whole board has to be there. So we might actually have it be completely virtual. So maybe I'll speak with Chris a little bit about what the structure of it would be. But last year's presentation, we reviewed the input that people gave, and we gave a high level. It was an opportunity for people to ask questions before the budget was finalized, and people found that very helpful.
I think was an important step. And also just to put a kind of bug in people's ear about the MVSD video. So the first kind of marketing video that we will do again this year is set to be launched around January 24th. And so I think we had some board members involved with that first video. So
some of us not as willing as others. Some of us got suckered into it when they stopped by central office. Just saying,
I may have stuck Chris in a chair with his hat on and no chance to comb his hair and said, read this on camera, go. I may have done that.
Chris, maybe now's a good time for a volunteer. Ask for a volunteer.
It was great. It was great. You did great.
So yeah, I will be sending out once we get that started, we'll be sending out emails to board members. I think Terry did a number of them. It was really just reading some bulleted script, and it was pretty easy peasy. We did it over Zoom.
Yeah, okay. Actually, the more I tried to prepare, the worse I got. So I think it's one of those things where you got to do it spontaneously.
Terry, I love to edit you anytime.
Oh, that would be good. Okay.
Okay, so our next meeting is scheduled for January 20th at 6:30. It's going to be the same format, virtually with a public space. We will figure out a community budget input forum for next week, along with our other scheduled meetings. Because Tuesday night is our negotiation scheduled meeting, and I believe it's Wednesday night is the board goals scheduled meeting,
Yes.
right? Yep.
So last year it was not a long meeting. Maybe it was half an hour, 45 minutes. So perhaps we can do a piggyback on Wednesday.
Yep. So tentatively, we'll probably have a community budget input forum on Wednesday. We'll figure out a time. Julie and I can probably talk tomorrow and figure that out. And we'll let everyone know. And so unless anyone has something to add at this time, I'd entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss.
Chris,
Go ahead.
I'm just wondering about this public meeting. Next week is awfully, do we have enough time to advertise and get the word out that we're going to have a public meeting?
Peter, I think so. I don't know that we advertised it any earlier. You know, we use Facebook, Front Porch Forum, the website. You know, we send usually an email out to families.
So I'll make sure people have a chance.
Don't forget the message boards at the Highgate Town Clerk's office and the park in Swanton.
Have they ever put up something about the school in Swanton? I know you've asked them several
They
times.
will if you ask them, yes. They said
They
would.
don't, I gotta tell you, Don, they don't like to share that sign.
Yeah, they don't. I know. They'll say
That's
that.
why we want to have a sign at MVU, because I think
No, I
that would
want us
really
to have
help.
a sign, but I think we need to ask, and if you want me to go on, I will, because.
Oh, I will give Brian Savage an email and see what he says.
I mean,
It might be different now. It'll probably be different now.
but you know, it's only up for probably 5 days. It's not like we're asking for months or stuff.
Speaking of sign, we're not anticipating any separate articles.
No.
Not proposing them, Toby, but the issue of a sign was brought up at the last facility task force meeting, along with some other smaller projects that we've been kicking down the road for a while, and it will be coming to the next one as well. I think there was support for it. I don't want to speak for the facility task force, but I think there was at least support to look at it. And we did look at some estimates for a sign as well. And so now it's just a matter of looking through some different revenue sources to try to find the funding for that.
Right, but so we don't want to make this a community participation topic. I'm not saying we should. I'm just, you know, if we don't do a separate article now, that's another whole year gone. You know, I don't know. That's for board members. I mean,
It's really not appropriate for a separate article because it's a single purchase. But, you know, we can put it in our ARP plan that has public input, or we've talked about doing it that way. Or we also have student activity, you know, we have other funds that are outside the general fund and other revenue sources. And I think that then it would be important that we're very transparent about what we're doing and how we're doing it when we get to that point.
Anything else? Seeing nothing at this time, I'd entertain a motion to go to an executive session, invite in Julie and Laura.
So moved.
Peter's a first. Steve's a second. Any discussion?
Just making it very clear that it's for contract issues related to negotiations and individual contracts that premature public knowledge would put either party at a substantial disadvantage.
Right. You ready to vote? Looks like we are. All those in favor going to executive session at 9:12. Raise your hand. Motion carries 9-0. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good night.